So I'm going to talk about question level analysis, and I thought I'd start by telling you what we used to do before. Now, there were some good things in what we did before, but I'm going to talk about how we changed things. So probably 4 or 5 years ago, we'd teach a topic on fractions and decimals, let's say, and then we'd have the fractions and decimals test, which would only be on fractions and decimals. We'd mark it, you'd get a general feel for how your class did. We would give out the test papers then once they'd been marked. We'd get kids to work through them. The teacher might go through some things on the board, and then we put them in a folder at the back of the room. And then we taught area and volume, and if you weren't that good at fractions and decimals, we didn't do an awful lot about it until the end of the year. So we decided that we would do something different about that. With all of the work that we did on data-driven instruction, we did lots of reading, and we wanted to do a number of things differently. So this is the before. So I'm going to talk a bit about our question level analysis spreadsheets, and before I put them all up on the screen, I thought I should just tell you that if you see a square that's white, it means the child's got 80% or above for that question. Grey 50 to 79 and black less than 50. I keep forgetting which way round it is. So in my head I just remember black is bad. So the more black there is, the worse they've done. So here's an example of what we would ask all of our teachers to do. Now it's really tiny, and please don't see tomorrow and say, I hear you're rubbish at multiplication. But this is what a teacher would do at the end of an end of unit assessment. So it feels like it would take ages, but actually it doesn't take that long to look at a question paper and to quickly enter students' scores. So this is my Year 7 class, and so this is a unit that they just did on algebra. So one of the things that's different now, algebra is unit 5, you can see, and 50% of the assessment is purely based on algebra, and the other 50% of the test is questions on all of the topics that they've done so far. So it's always 50% of the new unit, and the other 50% is made up of other things. So all of our assessments are cumulative. So what used to happen is, I'm teaching this unit on algebra, children haven't done fractions and decimals for ages, and they just forget it. You know, they're not trying to be difficult, it just doesn't stay in their heads. So when you're not too sure about fractions, you know that it will be tested in the next unit. So you know you'll get a bit more practice, and you know that it won't be okay just to not be any good at it, because it will keep coming up. So one of the things that we do then is we look by individual student, and that's really useful. So when it's parents' evening next week, and a parent says to me, you know, what can Isla do to improve? I can tell you precisely what are the things that she needs to do to improve. And we've got some resources, obviously, that will help students to do that. So the next thing that we do is the same spreadsheet, but you can see I've just highlighted those headings just at the bottom. So it tells me for my class, so this would be an example, 77% of my class got that question right, which is about dividing by numbers less than 10. So at the end of a unit, we'd have a week of reteach, and I'd be looking at what are the things that I need to reteach. So there are some things that I definitely don't need to reteach. 97% of us can add and subtract fractions, so that's going to be really good. But there'll be some things that I want to reteach in that week of lessons. So at Key Stage 3, there's a week of reteach, and at Key Stage 4, there's 2 weeks. And when you first talk to people about this, they say, I could never do that because, you know, I have so much content, I just can't waste time doing reteach. But I think we've found that that's not the case at all. It isn't any wasted time. It's much easier to be reteaching as you go, rather than just before the end of term exams, where you realise that kids can't do anything, so then you're reteaching everything. So it's much better to just be reteaching. And in terms of the kind of buy-in for the kids, really, you know, I'll say, some of us weren't that great at area and perimeter of a parallelogram. Let's practice that again. It's going to come up in the next test, so you don't want to get it wrong then. So, you know, let's keep working on that skill. So that would be a week, and we'd expect all of our staff to do that. At Key Stage 4, when we do our data meetings, which I think I've talked about before, we would look at people's reteach plans. And when I say that, I don't mean they have to hand a pro forma in. It could be a scribbled bit of paper in a notebook. It doesn't matter. But I want to see that people have identified what they're going to reteach and what they're going to do. And the other thing to say is that, you know, if I haven't taught something that well, doing it exactly the same way the second time round isn't going to make it any better. So I have to really think about, if kids didn't really grasp that, what am I going to do differently to help them to grasp it next time? So that's just for my class, and that would be really useful to know what I'm going to reteach. And then a kind of level higher, I suppose. This is has got some responsibility for looking at assessment at Key Stage 3, and we've just started this year. So I'm just showing you a section. So these are our Year 8 classes. These are the units that they've done so far in Year 8. And this is a bit boring, you don't need all the nitty-gritty, but they do a core assessment and an extension assessment. So it will give me this, and what it does is it highlights to me, in general, how a Year 8's getting on. So if I want to know, how are these different classes doing relative to each other? Is there something we need to look at? And then, there's nothing huge, but sometimes I will highlight something myself to think, this is something that I want to talk about. Now, interestingly in this one, students have been doing reasonably well in these extension assessments in Set 2, but those scores have gone down a bit for this current unit. So that's useful for me to know. Have I made that assessment too hard? Is the Unit 9 extension test too difficult? Is there anything particular that students haven't been grasping? So I think if somebody says to me, how is maths going in Year 8? Previously, I'd have had to look at 12 different pages on a spreadsheet, and this overview is quite helpful for me to think, how is maths going in Year 8? How are the different groups performing relative to each other? And there'll be a story about some of them that I might not know, and I'll talk to a teacher and say, your scores have been a little bit below the others. Is there anything that we can look at, or we could look at the question level analysis? So that's helped me. And then on another level then, with a similar idea, the other thing that has done is he's put together, this is a very small segment, so this is for Unit 7 for Year 8, this is as a whole year group, how are we doing with these particular questions? Okay, so the whole of Year 8 have done Unit 7 now, and those red headings, the numbers don't matter too much, but those red headings are things that as a year group we didn't do very well in those assessments. So our students in Year 8, not all of them, but a significant number of them, are not very good at whole number and fraction calculations. So what we did last CMM is we got all the tests back out and we looked at those particular questions. What is it about whole number and fraction calculations that kids in Year 8 can't do? Actually, the question was really difficult and the numbers were quite difficult, and it didn't necessarily mean that they're all terrible at it, but it was a highlighting thing. What is it that, why didn't students do so well on that when they did a lot better on other things? Things like factors, multiples and primes, we realise children aren't very good at learning the prime numbers, so we need to test the prime numbers more often. So we made a list of, from Year 7 and Year 8, about 10 topics that weren't done as well as the other things. And so we've done a variety of things with those then. I think I've written something about that. So we looked really carefully about, what was it? Was it about a particularly difficult question? Was it a common misconception? For some of them, it was things like, we kind of understood the question, but there was a difficult times table as part of it. So it wasn't the understanding of fractions, it was that we don't know what 7/8 are or whatever, that sort of thing. And I wouldn't have known that, perhaps if I hadn't seen that spreadsheet and thought about where those issues were and what those questions were. And the other thing that we discovered actually, which was interesting, is that the topic of area on first teaching, children had done very well with it. But when it came back up in the cumulative bit, it wasn't being done so well. So maybe that's about forgetting the formula and not testing it so often. So we've done a bit of reviewing of our scheme of work in the light of that. And then in terms of starters, we've said to people, here are the 10 topics that kids in Year 8 are not doing so well. When you're doing starters, keep on building these things in. Short division is not a thing that some Year 8s are great at. Do it really regularly until kids have really got that skill. So that was quite useful. And it might be in one place, actually, we just need to change an assessment question because it is a bit unfair, it's not a great question. And I think as you review assessments, you do find that, don't you? Sometimes the questions are not perfect. So then in terms of next steps, I just thought of a couple of things maybe it might be worth thinking about, what you do in terms of question level analysis. It obviously doesn't have to look anything like this. We really like numbers, so we have quite a lot of them. But then, just the idea of, can you see what needs to be retaught to particular students, particular classes, and then we're just trialling, thinking about, is there anything that the whole year group needs to practice.